After I became a widow, my daughter told me, work or leave. In desperation, I agreed to care for a paralyzed billionaire. On the very first night, I froze his tea. Guess who came crawling back? Can you believe that before the last funeral flower withered on my husband Dante's grave, my own daughter, Harlow, delivered an ultimatum that would shatter my entire world? It was a moment of betrayal so sharp, it made me question everything I thought I knew about family and the meaning of home. There I was, standing in the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, baked countless birthday cakes, a place steeped in 45 years of family memories. Harlow walked in, and I knew that look. It was the same one she'd had since she was a teenager, the look that said her mind was made up, and my feelings didn't factor in. "Mom, we need to talk," she announced, her designer purse hitting the counter with a sharp, unforgiving click. At 42, Harlow had her father's strong jawline, but none of his warmth. I was still in my black funeral dress, the weight of Dante's absence a crushing burden on my chest. My hands trembled as I reached for the coffee pot. "What arrangement, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her reply was crisp, businesslike, devoid of emotion. "You living here in my house. Daddy left everything to me, remember? And I can't afford to support you anymore." The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile. Brown liquid spread across the white ceramic like my life was quite literally falling to pieces. "Harlow, it's only been 3 weeks since Daddy died." My voice cracked. "I know," she said, not even glancing at the mess. "But life goes on, Mom. I have my own family to think about, my own bills." I knelt, my 68-year-old knees protesting with every movement, to pick up the shards. "I have my Social Security. It's not much, but I can contribute." Harlow laughed, but there was no humor in it. $800 a month? That doesn't even cover the utilities. "Look, I've been thinking about this. I have a solution." I stopped cleaning, looking up at my daughter, the baby I'd rocked through sleepless nights, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "What kind of solution?" "There's a job. Private nursing. The pay is excellent." She pulled out her phone, scrolling rapidly, then showed me a listing. "This man needs round-the-clock care. You were a nurse before you married Daddy. It's perfect." My stomach dropped. "Harlow, I haven't worked as a nurse in over 40 years. Medicine has changed. I wouldn't even know how to. It's not medical nursing, Mom. It's more like companionship, helping with daily activities. You can do that." She was already making plans. "I already contacted them. You have an interview tomorrow." I stood slowly, ceramic shards still cutting into my palm. "And if I don't get the job?" Harlow finally looked at me, and I saw the answer in her cold, unyielding eyes before she spoke. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't carry you forever." The next morning, I stood outside a mansion that looked straight out of a movie. The driveway alone was longer than our old street. My hands shook as I rang the doorbell, a terrifying question echoing in my mind. How had my life come to this? At 68, I was applying for a job I wasn't qualified for because my own daughter had effectively thrown me out. A stern woman in her 50s, Patricia, Mr. Hawthorne's house manager, greeted me. "Mrs. Thompson, please come in." The house was even more intimidating inside. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than Dante and I had made in our entire lives. "Mr. Hawthorne requires assistance with most daily activities," Patricia explained as we walked through halls lined with portraits of people who had clearly never worried about money. "He's paralyzed from the waist down following an accident 5 years ago. The position includes room and board, plus a very generous salary." We stopped outside a set of double doors. "Before we go in, I should warn you, Mr. Hawthorne can be difficult. He's had 17 caregivers in the past 2 years. My heart sank. 17 caregivers. What had I gotten myself into? Patricia opened the doors to reveal a massive library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. And there, in a wheelchair by the window, sat a man with silver hair and the kind of strong features that must have been devastatingly handsome when he was younger. "Mr. Hawthorne, this is Hilda Thompson, the candidate we discussed." He turned his wheelchair toward us, and I felt the strangest sensation wash over me. His eyes were blue, the kind of deep blue you only see in old photographs or faded memories. When his gaze met mine, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Confusion? I couldn't tell. "Mrs. Thompson." His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of something I couldn't place. "Please sit down." I lowered myself into the chair across from him, trying to ignore how my heart had started beating faster. There was something about his face, the way he looked at me, that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. "Patricia tells me you were a nurse," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. He was studying me, searching for something. Yes, sir. Many years ago, before I married. My voice came out steadier than I felt. And your husband recently passed away. It wasn't a question. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I glanced down at my hands, still wearing Dante's ring. It's been difficult. When I looked up again, Terence Hawthorne was still staring at me with that intense, almost desperate expression. Have we met before, Mrs. Thompson? There's something about you that seems familiar. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to smile politely. I don't think so, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm sure I would remember. But even as I said it, alarm bells were ringing in my head because there was something familiar about him too. Something about the shape of his mouth, the way he tilted his head when he spoke. Something that made my hands tremble and my breath catch. Perhaps not, he murmured, but he didn't look convinced. Tell me, Mrs. Thompson, why do you want this position? The honest answer was that I was desperate, that my daughter had thrown me out, that at 68, I was too old and too tired to start over. But I had no choice. Instead, I said, I believe in taking care of people. I always have. Something in his expression softened. And you're not afraid of challenging situations? I thought about Harlow's cold eyes, about cleaning up my broken coffee cup while my daughter watched, about sleeping in the guest room of my own home because Harlow had already moved into the master bedroom. No, sir, I'm not afraid. Terence nodded slowly. Patricia, would you give us a moment alone? After Patricia left, closing the doors behind her, Terence wheeled his chair closer. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be frank with you. I am not an easy man to work for. I'm demanding, particular, and I don't suffer fools gladly. But if you take this position, you'll be treated with respect and paid well. Very well. He named a salary that made my head spin, more money than Dante had made in his best year. However, he continued, I need someone I can trust, someone who won't gossip about my personal affairs or treat me like an invalid. Can you be that person? I looked into those blue eyes and felt that strange flutter of recognition again. Yes, Mr. Hawthorne, I can. Good. He extended his hand, and when our fingers touched, I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. Welcome to my home, Hilda. The way he said my name, soft and almost reverent, made my heart skip. I pulled my hand back quickly, telling myself I was imagining things. I was a widow, for God's sake, a grandmother. I had no business feeling anything for this man. But as Patricia showed me to my quarters later that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. And the way Terence Hawthorne looked at me, like he was seeing a ghost from his past, made me wonder if I was about to discover something I'd spent 48 years trying to forget. My first week at the Hawthorne mansion felt like living in a beautiful, gilded prison. My room was larger than the entire apartment Dante and I had shared, with its own sitting area and a bathroom that sparkled like a luxury hotel. But every morning when I woke up, I felt the crushing weight of my new reality. At 68, I was essentially a live-in servant. Terence was exactly as Patricia had warned, demanding, particular, and with a sharp tongue when things weren't done to his specifications. His morning coffee had to be at exactly 7:15, not 7:20. His newspapers arranged in a specific order. His medication schedule rigid, and God help me if I was even a minute late. But there were moments, quiet moments between his commands and criticisms, when I would catch him watching me with that same intense expression from our first meeting, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering him for years. Hilda, he said on Thursday morning as I arranged his breakfast tray. That's an unusual name. Family name, I replied, pausing and cutting his grapefruit. My grandmother's name. She was German. German, he repeated thoughtfully. And where did you grow up? Here and there. I kept my voice neutral, but my hands had started to shake slightly. My father moved around a lot for work. It wasn't entirely a lie. We had moved frequently, though not for work, more like running from creditors and my father's gambling debts. But some memories were better left buried. That afternoon, while Terence napped, I finally unpacked the 3 boxes Harlow had grudgingly allowed me to take from the house. Most of it was practical items. Clothes, a few books, my jewelry box. But at the bottom of the last box, wrapped in tissue paper, was something I'd almost forgotten I still had. My old photo albums. I'd packed them without thinking, probably because they were sitting on my nightstand after I'd been looking through them during those first lonely nights after Dante's funeral. Now, sitting in the elegant chair by my bedroom window, I unwrapped them with trembling fingers. The first album was from my marriage to Dante, our wedding photos, pictures of baby Harlow, family vacations. A lifetime of careful, respectable memories. I set it aside and reached for the older one, the one I rarely looked at anymore. The cover was faded blue leather, cracked at the corners. Inside were photographs from my life before Dante, before marriage and motherhood, before the careful, controlled existence I'd built for myself. The first few pages were innocent enough. High school graduation, my nursing school friends, my parents looking young and hopeful. But as I turned the pages, my breath started coming faster. There, on page 12, was a photograph that made the world tilt sideways. I was 20 years old in the picture, wearing a yellow sundress I'd sewn myself. My hair was long and dark, pulled back with a ribbon. I was laughing at something the photographer had said, my head thrown back with pure joy. And standing beside me, his arm around my waist and his face lit up with the kind of smile that could melt hearts, was a young man with dark hair and devastating blue eyes. Terry Hawthorne. My hand shook so violently, I nearly dropped the album. Terry, not Terrence. Terry, who had loved jazz music and chocolate ice cream, and the way I looked in that yellow dress. Terry, who had promised to marry me as soon as he made his fortune. Terry, who had kissed me goodbye on a train platform 48 years ago and never came back. I stared at the photograph until my eyes burned, trying to reconcile the young man in the picture with the silver-haired man in the wheelchair downstairs. The features were the same, those aristocratic cheekbones, the strong jaw, the eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. But Terry had been warm, passionate, full of dreams and wild plans for our future. This Terence Hawthorne was cold, controlled, bitter. What had happened to transform one into the other? I turned the page with shaking fingers and found more pictures. Terry and me at the county fair sharing cotton candy. Terry teaching me to dance in my tiny apartment while my elderly neighbor banged on the ceiling. Terry and me sitting by the lake, my head on his shoulder, both of us looking like we believed love could conquer anything. The last picture in the series was taken the morning he left. We were standing on the train platform, his suitcase at his feet. I was crying. I remember that day with painful clarity now. And he was cupping my face in his hands, promising me that he'd be back within 2 years, rich enough to give me everything I deserved. I'm going to make something of myself, Hilda, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm going to build an empire, and then I'm coming back for you. Will you wait for me? And I had promised I would. God help me, I had meant it. But 2 years had stretched into 3, then 4. His letters became sporadic, then stopped altogether. I'd heard rumors that he'd made it big in real estate, but by then I'd met Dante, sweet, steady Dante, who loved me without conditions, who didn't need to conquer the world to prove his worth. I'd married Dante 6 months before Terrence, had finally sent word that he was coming home. The letter was still there, tucked behind the last photograph. I pulled it out with trembling fingers, though I knew every word by heart. My dearest Hilda, it began in his bold handwriting. Asterisk, I've done it. Everything I promised you and more. I'm coming home next month, and then we can finally begin our life together. I've bought a house, our house, and I can't wait to carry you across the threshold as my wife. All my love, all my dreams, all my tomorrows belong to you. Forever yours, Terry. Asterisk, the letter was dated 3 weeks after my wedding to Dante. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt tears streaming down my face. All these years, I convinced myself that Terry had forgotten about me, that his promises had been the empty words of a young man drunk on his own ambitions. But he had kept his word. He had come back for me. I just already belonged to someone else. A soft knock on my door made me jump. I quickly shoved the album and letter under a pillow and wiped my eyes. Come in. Patricia entered with a concerned expression. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Hawthorne is asking for you. He seems agitated. I smoothed my hair and followed Patricia. Downstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. Could he have remembered? Was that why he'd been watching me so intently? I found Terence in his study, staring out the window at the gardens. When he heard my footsteps, he turned his wheelchair around, and I saw something different in his expression. Not the cold control I'd grown accustomed to, but something raw, more vulnerable. Hilda, he said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I clasped my hands in front of me to hide their trembling. Of course, Mr. Hawthorne. Have you ever been to Millbrook? It's a small town about 2 hours north of here. My breath caught. Millbrook was where I'd grown up, where I'd met Terry, where I'd fallen in love for the first time. I'm not sure, I lied, but my voice betrayed me. Terence studied my face with those piercing blue eyes. There was a diner there, Murphy's I think it was called, and a little lake where young people used to go on Sunday afternoons. I felt the color drain from my face. Murphy's Diner, where Terry had bought me cherry coke and told me jokes that made me laugh until my sides hurt. The lake where he'd first kissed me under a canopy of stars. Mr. Hawthorne, I think perhaps you're confusing me with someone else. But even as I said it, I could see in his eyes that he wasn't confused at all. The mask of cold control was slipping, revealing the man I'd once loved with every fiber of my being. Perhaps, he said softly, but his gaze never left my face. Perhaps I am. As I turned to leave, I heard him whisper something that made my knees nearly buckle. Yellow dress. You always looked beautiful in yellow. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Terry's young face in those photographs, heard his voice promising to come back for me. And downstairs, the man he'd become was probably lying awake, too, piecing together the same memories that were tearing my heart apart. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't keep pretending. The charade was eating me alive, and it was clear that Terry, was remembering more each day. Better to face the truth head-on than let it destroy us both slowly. I found him in the conservatory, reading the morning paper. The sunlight streaming through the glass walls caught the silver in his hair, and for a moment I could see both versions of him superimposed. The young man full of dreams and the successful, lonely man he'd become. Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne. I set his coffee down exactly where he liked it, my hand surprisingly steady. Hilda! He looked up from his paper, and I saw exhaustion in those blue eyes. Did you sleep well? No, I said honestly. Did you? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No. I kept thinking about yellow dresses and cherry coke at Murphy's Diner. My breath caught. There was no point in denying it anymore. The cherry coke was too sweet. You always said I should get vanilla, but I was stubborn. Terrence closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Hilda Marie Brennan, you wore your grandmother's locket and had a scar on your left knee from falling off your bicycle when you were 8. I touched my throat automatically where the locket used to rest. You gave me a ring, a little silver band with a promise that someday you'd replace it with diamonds. I still have it. His voice was barely a whisper. I've carried it with me for 48 years. We stared at each other across the space that separated us. Not just the few feet between his wheelchair and where I stood, but the decades of different lives, different choices, different kinds of love. Why didn't you tell me who you were? He asked. I sank into the chair across from him, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. Because I was afraid. Because I'm not the girl you remember anymore. Because I took a shaky breath. Because you're not the boy I remember either. Terrence nodded slowly. When I came back and found out you'd married Dante Thompson, I wanted to hate you. I told myself you'd never really loved me, that you'd just been waiting for someone better to come along. That's not true. The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended. I waited, Terry. I waited until I couldn't wait anymore. Your letter stopped coming and I thought. I wiped away a tear. I thought you'd forgotten about me. I never stopped writing, he said quietly. But my business partners convinced me that a small-town girl would hold me back. They intercepted my letters, told me you'd moved on. By the time I realized what they'd done, you were already married. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. All those years of wondering, of feeling abandoned, when Terry had been trying to reach me all along. I hired a private investigator to keep track of you, Terrence continued. I know it sounds terrible, but I needed to know you were happy. I knew when Harlow was born, when you moved to the house on Maple Street, when Dante got promoted at the bank. I even knew when he got sick. I stared at him, shocked. You've been watching me for 48 years. From a distance. I never interfered, never tried to contact you. I needed to know you were all right. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. And I kept hoping that someday, somehow, fate would bring you back to me. With trembling hands, he opened the box to reveal the silver ring he'd given me all those years ago. The one I'd returned to him in tears the day before my wedding, unable to bear wearing another man's promise while pledging my life to Dante. You kept it, I whispered. I kept everything. Every photo, every letter you wrote me, every memory. He looked down at the ring. I never married Hilda. I told myself it was because I was too focused on business. But the truth was simpler than that. No one else was you. The weight of his words settled between us like a stone dropping into still water. 48 years of loneliness, of building walls around his heart, of watching the woman he loved live her life with someone else. Terry, I didn't know what to say. How do you apologize for a lifetime of separation that neither of you chose? I don't blame you, he said quickly. You made the right choice. Dante was a good man. He loved you the way you deserve to be loved, and he was there when I couldn't be. I've made my peace with that. Have you? I asked softly, because the man I've been working for these past weeks doesn't seem at peace with anything. Terrence's jaw tightened. The accident changed me. 5 years ago, I was still holding on to the fantasy that maybe someday we'd meet again, that maybe there could be some kind of second chance. Then I woke up in a hospital bed, paralyzed from the waist down, and I realized how foolish I'd been. What could I offer you now? A broken man in a wheelchair. Stop! I stood up abruptly, anger flaring in my chest. Just stop. Do you think I'm so shallow that your legs matter more than your heart? Do you think I'm the kind of woman who would turn away from someone I cared about because they needed help instead of being able to give it? He looked startled by my vehemence. Hilda, I loved you, Terry. Not your potential fortune. Not your grand plans for the future. I loved the boy who brought me wildflowers because he couldn't afford roses. The boy who held me when I cried about my father's drinking. The boy who believed in dreams so fiercely that I couldn't help but believe in them too. I was crying now, 48 years of suppressed emotions pouring out of me like water through a broken dam. And if that boy is still in there somewhere, then everything else is just details. Terrence reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His fingers were older now, marked with age spots and thinner than I remembered, but his touch still sent electricity through my veins. He's still here, he said quietly, buried under a lot of bitterness and disappointment, but still here. The question is, what do we do now? I looked around the conservatory at the life of luxury he'd built around himself. Then I looked back at his face, searching for the answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask. Are you happy, Terry? Really happy? He was quiet for a long moment. I was successful. I was respected. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. He paused. But happy? No. I don't think I've been truly happy since the day I left you on that train platform. Then maybe, I said carefully, it's time to stop punishing ourselves for choices we made when we were different people. Maybe it's time to see what the people we are now could build together. Terrence brought my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Would you be willing to try? Not as my nurse, but as whatever we could be to each other. I thought about Harlow, about the cold house where I was no longer welcome. I thought about the lonely apartment I'd been planning to find, about spending my remaining years in solitude. Then I looked at the man who had loved me faithfully for nearly 5 decades, even from a distance. Yes, I whispered. I'd like to try. But even as the words left my lips, I knew our path wouldn't be easy. Harlow would have something to say about this arrangement, and I doubted it would be congratulatory. My daughter had never approved of anything that took attention away from her own needs, and she certainly wouldn't approve of her mother finding love again. The thought of facing Harlow's reaction made my stomach clench with anxiety. But for the first time in weeks, I also felt something else. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for second chances after all. 3 weeks after our confession in the conservatory, Terry asked me to move into the master wing of the house, not as his caregiver, but as his companion. The word felt strange on my tongue when I repeated it to myself. Companion, it sounded so much more meaningful than employee, yet not quite as binding as the words we'd once dreamed of using. You don't have to decide right now, he said over dinner in the smaller dining room we'd started using instead of the formal one. But Hilda, I want you to know that this isn't about convenience or loneliness. This is about the life I should have been living all along. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. Terry, I need to tell you something about Harlow. His expression grew serious. What about her? She doesn't know who you are. When she found this job for me, she just saw dollar signs. A wealthy man who needed care. A mother she wanted out of her house. She has no idea about our history. Terry nodded slowly. And you think she'll have a problem with our arrangement? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My daughter threw me out 3 weeks after her father's funeral. She cares about exactly 2 things, her own comfort and other people's money. When she finds out I'm living here as more than hired help, she's going to assume I'm after your inheritance. Are you? Terry asked quietly. I looked at him in shock. How can you even ask that? Because 48 years is a long time, Hilda. People change. And my wealth, he gestured around the elegant dining room. It has a way of changing how people see me. I stood up abruptly, heard flashing through me like a knife blade. If that's what you think of me, then maybe this was a mistake. Sit down. His voice was gentle but firm. Please. I had to ask. I've been burned before by people who claimed to love me but were really in love with my bank account. I needed to hear you say it. I remained standing, my arms crossed. Say what? That you don't want my money? That you're here because of who I am, not what I have. I shouldn't have to say it. You should know it. Terry reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You're right. I should, and deep down I do. But Hilda, you have to understand. When you have this much money, you start to question everyone's motives, even the people you love most. I felt my anger deflate slightly. Is that really how you've lived all these years, not trusting anyone? Pretty much. He looked down at his hands. It's a lonely way to live, but it seemed safer than being hurt again. I sat back down, studying his face, the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth turned down at the corners. This was what success without love had done to him, turned him into a suspicious, isolated man who questioned even the purest emotions. For the record, I said quietly, I don't want your money. I want you to leave every penny to charity if it makes you happy. I have my Social Security and a small pension from the hospital where I worked before Harlow was born. It's not much, but I've lived on less. Relief flooded his features. I'm sorry I had to ask. Don't apologize. Just don't ask again. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the salmon Patricia had prepared. Now about Harlow. When she finds out about this, she's going to cause trouble. I need you to be prepared for that. Terry's expression hardened. What kind of trouble? She'll probably demand to know what your intentions are. She might threaten to sue, claim I'm taking advantage of you. She might even try to have me removed from the house. Let her try. His voice carried the steel that had built his business empire. This is my house, Hilda. No one tells me who I can and cannot invite to live in it. I wished I could share his confidence, but I knew my daughter better than he did. Harlow could be ruthless when she felt threatened, and she would definitely feel threatened by this development. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Harlow's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach clenched. Speak of the devil, I murmured, showing Terry the display. Answer it, he said. Let's get this over with. I swiped to accept the call. Hello, Harlow. Mom. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I just had the most interesting conversation with Mrs. Patterson from church. She said she saw you at the grocery store with some man in a wheelchair, and you were acting very familiar with him. I closed my eyes. In a town this size, of course, someone would see us and report back to Harlow. Terry and I had gone to the market together yesterday, and he'd insisted on buying ingredients for the chocolate cake I'd mentioned missing from my childhood. To anyone watching, we probably did look more intimate than employer and employee. His name is Terrence Hawthorne, I said. Carefully. He's the man I work for. Work for or work on? Harlow's voice dripped with accusation. Because Mrs. Patterson said you two looked awfully cozy for a professional relationship. Terry gestured for the phone, and I shook my head. This was my battle to fight. Harlow, I'm 68 years old. I think I'm capable of conducting myself appropriately. Are you sleeping with him? The blunt question hit me like a slap. That's none of your business. It is if you're embarrassing our family name. Daddy's not even cold in the ground, and you're already throwing yourself at the first rich man who shows you attention. White-hot rage flooded through me. How dare you? Your father has been gone for 2 months, and I grieved for him properly. But I'm not dead, Harlow. I'm allowed to have companionship. Companionship? Harlow laughed coldly. Is that what we're calling gold digging now? Terry's face had gone pale with anger. He gestured more forcefully for the phone, and this time I handed it to him. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice arctic. This is Terrence Hawthorne. I think there are some things you need to understand. I could hear Harlow's shocked silence through the phone. Then her voice was suddenly much more respectful. Mr. Hawthorne, I didn't realize you were there. Clearly. Now listen very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Your mother is not a gold digger. She's not embarrassing anyone, and she's certainly not throwing herself at me. If anything, I'm the one pursuing her. Sir, I think there might be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Terry interrupted, is your belief that you have any say in your mother's personal life. She's a grown woman who can make her own decisions about who she spends time with. But she's vulnerable right now. She's grieving, and she might not be thinking clearly. Your mother is one of the strongest, most clear-thinking women I've ever met. The fact that you can't see that says more about you than it does about her. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for several seconds. When Harlow spoke again, her voice had taken on a different quality, harder, more calculating. Mr. Hawthorne, I appreciate your friendship with my mother, but I hope you understand my concern. She's been through a lot lately, and I just want to make sure she's not being taken advantage of. The only person who's taken advantage of your mother recently, Terry said quietly, is you. Another silence, then Harlow's voice, cold as winter. I'd like to meet with you, Mr. Hawthorne, to discuss this situation properly. Terry looked at me, eyebrows raised. I nodded reluctantly. Better to face this head-on than let Harlow stew and plan in private. Fine, Terry said into the phone. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Harlow hung up without saying goodbye. Terry handed me back my phone, his jaw tight with anger. Well, that went about as well as expected. I sank back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. She's going to try to turn you against me. She'll make it sound like I manipulated you, like I planned this whole thing. Let her try. Terry reached across the table and took my hand. Hilda, I need you to understand something. I didn't survive 48 years in business by being easily manipulated, and I certainly didn't build this empire by letting people tell me who I can and cannot care about. She can be very convincing when she wants to be, and I can be very stubborn when I need to be. He squeezed my hand. Your daughter doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is the thought of losing you again. That night, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, dreading the next afternoon's confrontation. I knew Harlow would come armed with arguments designed to drive a wedge between Terry and me. She painted me as a desperate widow preying on a lonely, disabled man. She questioned my motives, my timing, my very right to seek happiness again. But as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to Terry's words. The only thing that scares me is the thought of losing you again. Tomorrow, I would find out if that was really true. Harlow arrived exactly at 2 o'clock, dressed in her best black suit, like she was attending a business meeting rather than visiting her mother. I watched from the window as she stepped out of her car, smoothing her skirt and checking her reflection in the side mirror. Even from a distance, I could see the calculation in her movements, the way she squared her shoulders like a soldier preparing for battle. Terry had insisted we meet in his study rather than one of the more comfortable sitting rooms. If she wants to treat this like a business negotiation, he'd said, then we'll meet her on those terms. Patricia showed Harlow in, and I felt my stomach clench as my daughter's eyes swept the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the original artwork, the massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. I could practically see dollar signs reflecting in her pupils. Mr. Hawthorne. Harlow extended her hand with practiced grace. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Terry shook her hand briefly, his expression neutral. Miss Thompson, please have a seat. Harlow settled into the leather chair across from Terry's desk, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. She looked like the successful real estate agent she was, all polished confidence and professional charm. Only I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her fingers. I hope you understand that I'm only here out of concern for my mother, she began, her voice warm with false sincerity. She's been through so much lately, and I'm worried that she might be making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And what decisions would those be? Terry asked mildly. Harlow glanced at me, then back at Terry. Well, this living arrangement, for one. It's highly unusual for a caregiver to move into the employer's personal quarters. It raises questions about the nature of your relationship. What kind of questions? Terry's voice remained calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. Questions about boundaries, about appropriate professional conduct. Harlow leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hawthorne, I'm sure you're a lovely man, but my mother is vulnerable right now. She's grieving. She's financially insecure, and she might be confusing gratitude with other feelings. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Harlow, that's enough. It's all right, Hilda. Terry never took his eyes off my daughter. I'd like to hear what Miss Thompson has to say. Harlow shot me a warning look, then turned back to Terry with renewed confidence. I'm saying that my mother has always been somewhat impressionable. She sees the best in people, sometimes to her detriment, and in her current state, she might not be thinking clearly about the implications of this situation. The implications being what exactly? Well, there's the obvious concern about what people will think. A widow moving in with a wealthy man so soon after her husband's death. It doesn't look good. Harlow's voice took on a concerned, caring tone that made my skin crawl. And then there's the question of what happens when this arrangement ends. Will my mother be left with nothing again? Will she have to start over once more? Terry leaned back in his wheelchair, his fingers steepled in front of him. Those are interesting points. Tell me, Miss Thompson, what do you think would be best for your mother? Harlow's eyes lit up, thinking she found an opening. I think she should come home, back to her family, where she belongs, where she can grieve properly and make rational decisions about her future. And by home, you mean the house you inherited from your father? The house you asked her to leave? Harlow had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was a misunderstanding. I was emotional, dealing with my own grief. Of course, my mother is always welcome in my home. For how long? Terry asked quietly. I'm sorry. How long would your mother be welcome? Until you decide she's a burden again? Until the next time you need space for your own family? Harlow's mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculating woman underneath. Mr. Hawthorne, I don't think you understand the complexity of family relationships. Oh, I understand perfectly. Terry's voice cut through her words like a blade. I understand that you threw your mother out 3 weeks after burying her husband of 45 years. I understand that you gave her an ultimatum, work or live on the street. And I understand that the only reason you're here now is because you've realized she might have found something better than what you were offering. Harlow's face flushed red. That's not. I was protecting her. Teaching her to be independent. By making her homeless. She wasn't homeless. She had options such as... Harlow looked frantically between Terry and me, clearly not expecting to be put on the defensive. She could have found an apartment. She has Social Security. $800 a month. Terry said quietly. Do you know what the average rent is in this area, Miss Thompson? Harlow's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. $200. Terry continued. For a one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, your mother would have been $400 short every month just for housing. That doesn't include food, utilities, medical expenses, or any of the other costs of living. She could have found something cheaper. Where? In what part of town? You were willing to let your 68-year-old mother live in poverty rather than inconvenience yourself. I watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because someone was finally holding Harlow accountable for her cruelty. Sadness because that someone had to be a stranger rather than my daughter's own conscience. Harlow's professional composure was cracking rapidly. You don't understand. My mother, she's always been difficult. High maintenance. She expects everyone to take care of her. High maintenance. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Harlow, I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I took care of your father through 5 years of cancer treatments without a single complaint. I babysat your children every weekend for free. And I've never asked you for anything except a place to grieve my husband. You were smothering me. Harlow exploded, her mask finally falling away completely. Always hovering, always trying to help, always making me feel guilty for having my own life. I needed space to breathe. So you threw me out, I said quietly. I gave you a chance to stand on your own 2 feet for once. The silence that followed was deafening. Terry looked at Harlow with an expression of such cold disgust that she actually shrank back in her chair. Miss Thompson, he said finally, I think we're done here. Wait! Harlow's voice was desperate now. You don't understand what you're getting into. My mother, she has expectations. She'll want marriage, security, legal protections. She's not just looking for companionship. Terry's expression didn't change. And what if she's looking for those things? What if I want to give them to her? Harlow went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that your mother and I are both adults who can make our own decisions about our relationship. Whether that relationship remains as it is now or develops into something more is none of your concern. Something more? Harlow's voice was barely a whisper. Terry reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box, the same box he'd shown me in the conservatory containing the silver ring from our youth. Your mother and I have a history that predates your father, predates you. Predates everything you think you know about her life. Harlow stared at the box like it was a poisonous snake. What kind of history? The kind that matters, Terry said simply. We loved each other once, very deeply. Circumstances separated us, but they didn't destroy what we felt. And now, 48 years later, we have a chance to see if what we had was real enough to survive time and change. You're talking about marriage? Harlow's voice was flat, emotionless. I'm talking about living the life we should have lived all along. Harlow turned to me, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. This is why you took this job, isn't it? You knew who he was. You planned this whole thing. No, I said firmly. I had no idea Terry was here when I answered that job listing. I thought he was dead or married, or living on the other side of the world. The last thing I expected was to find him in that wheelchair in this house. Terry! Harlow's voice dripped with venom. You call him Terry? That's my name, Terry said calmly. Terrence is what my business associates call me. Terry is what the people I love call me. Harlow stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You're both insane. You think you can just pick up where you left off 48 years ago. You think you can erase an entire lifetime. We're not trying to erase anything, I said. We're trying to build something new from what's left. What about Daddy? What about your marriage, your family, everything you built together? Your father was a good man and I loved him. But Terry was my first love, and some things never really end. Harlow looked between us with growing panic. He's using you, Mom. Can't you see that? He's lonely and disabled and you're convenient. When he gets tired of playing house, you'll be out on the street again. That's enough. Terry's voice cut through the air like a whip. You will not speak about your mother that way in my house. Your house. Harlow laughed bitterly. Yes, let's talk about your house. Your money. Your power. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Terry opened the desk drawer again and pulled out a thick legal document. Since you seem so concerned about money, Perhaps you should know that I've already updated my will. Everything I own is going to charity. The Children's Hospital, the Homeless Shelter, the Animal Rescue Foundation. Your mother won't inherit a penny from me." Harlow stared at the document, her face going white. "You what?" "I told him to do it," I said quietly. "I don't want his money, Harlow. I never did. I want him." Something in my daughter's face collapsed then, like a building with all its supports suddenly removed. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, frightened and confused and desperately in need of comfort. But then the mask snapped back into place, harder and colder than before. "Fine," she said, her voice like ice. "Fine, throw your life away on some fantasy from 50 years ago. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." She turned and walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "And don't expect me to be here to pick up the pieces when he's done with you." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Terry and I sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the sound of Harlow's car starting and driving away. Finally, Terry reached across the desk and took my hand. "Are you all right?" I thought about the question, testing my emotions like prodding a sore tooth. Was I all right? My daughter had just disowned me, accused me of being a gold digger and a fool, and stormed out of my life with every intention of never coming back. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I think I am." 6 months later, I stood in the same conservatory where Terry and I had first acknowledged our past. But everything had changed. The morning light streaming through the glass walls caught the simple gold band on my left hand, not the elaborate diamond Terry had once promised to replace my silver ring with, but something better. Something chosen by the people we'd become, rather than the dreams of who we thought we'd be. We'd married quietly 3 weeks ago with only Patricia and Terry's lawyer as witnesses. It wasn't the grand wedding I'd imagined as a 20-year-old girl, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Two people who'd found their way back to each other against all odds, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Patricia said, entering the conservatory with her usual brisk efficiency, but I caught the small smile she tried to hide. Even Patricia, stern and practical as she was, had softened toward our unlikely romance. "There's someone at the front door asking to see you." My heart clenched. I'd been expecting this visit for months, ever since the wedding announcement appeared in the local paper. Harlow had maintained her silence since that awful confrontation in Terry's study, but I knew she'd heard the news. In a town this size, everyone knew everyone's business. "Who is it?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your daughter, ma'am. She seems upset." I found Terry in his study reviewing quarterly reports for the foundation he'd established to manage his charitable giving. He looked up as I entered, immediately reading the tension in my face. "She's here," I said simply. Terry set down his papers and wheeled his chair around to face me. "Do you want me to handle this?" "No, she's my daughter. This is my conversation to have." I smoothed my hands over my skirt, trying to calm my nerves. "But I'd like you to be there if you don't mind." "Of course." We found Harlow in the formal living room, perched on the edge of a velvet settee like she was ready to bolt at any moment. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked older, more fragile, and for a moment, my maternal instincts kicked in. "Harlow!" I kept my voice neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Mom!" She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "Congratulations on your marriage." I heard it was lovely. It was... I settled into the chair across from her, Terry positioning his wheelchair beside me. "Simple, but lovely." Harlow's eyes darted to our joined hands, to the matching gold bands we wore. "You actually did it. You actually married him." There was an edge to her voice, a bitterness that made my heart ache. "I did. For better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health." Harlow laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "You know what the worst part is? I actually thought you might come back after the novelty wore off. After you realized what you'd given up, I thought you'd come home. This is my home now. With him." She looked at Terry with barely concealed resentment. "With a man you barely know anymore." "I know him better than you think," I said quietly. "And more importantly, I know myself better than I did 6 months ago." Harlow was quiet for a long moment, staring at the Persian rug beneath her feet. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about what you said about Daddy and your first love and things never really ending." She took a shaky breath. "I went through Daddy's papers after you left. I found some letters." My breath caught. "What kind of letters?" "Love letters to someone named Jennifer." Harlow's voice was barely a whisper. Dated from 2 years before he died. He was having an affair, Mom. For at least 2 years, maybe longer. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dante, my steady, faithful Dante, had been unfaithful. While I was caring for him through his illness, while I was holding his hand through chemotherapy and pretending not to notice how much weight he was losing, he was writing love letters to another woman. Terry's hand tightened around mine, grounding me, keeping me steady. I'm sorry, Harlow continued. I know it hurts, but I thought you should know that maybe your marriage wasn't as perfect as I always believed it was. I closed my eyes, processing this revelation. It should have destroyed me. It should have made me question everything I thought I knew about my life with Dante. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. Harlow looked surprised. You're not angry. I'm sad, disappointed, but not angry. I thought about how to explain what I was feeling. Your father was a good man who made some poor choices. That doesn't erase the good years we had together, but it does put things in perspective. What kind of perspective? The perspective that maybe I don't owe my entire life to his memory. Maybe I don't have to feel guilty for finding happiness again. Harlow was crying now, tears streaming down her face unchecked. I was so jealous of you, Mom. So angry that you could just move on, start over, be happy. I couldn't understand how you could forget Daddy so easily. I didn't forget him. I never will. But I also couldn't stay frozen in grief forever. And I made it worse by throwing you out. Harlow's voice broke completely. I was so hurt, so angry about the affair. And I took it out on you. I blamed you for not being enough to keep him faithful. And then I blamed you for being too much when you needed support. The pieces of my daughter's behavior finally clicked into place. The sudden coldness after Dante's funeral, the cruel ultimatum, the desperate need to control my life. Harlow hadn't been protecting herself from my grief. She'd been drowning in her own anger and disappointment. Oh, sweetheart. I stood up and moved to sit beside her on the settee. You should have told me. How could I? How could I tell you that your perfect husband was a cheater? That everything you believed about your marriage was a lie? It wasn't all a lie, I said gently. The early years were real. The love was real, even if it changed over time. And you were real. The best thing that came out of that marriage. Harlow leaned against me, and for the first time in months, she felt like my daughter again, instead of a stranger wearing a familiar face. I've been so awful to you, she whispered. You've been hurting. There's a difference. Can you forgive me? I looked across the room at Terry, who was watching us with quiet understanding. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to follow my heart. I forgive you, I said, but things can't go back to the way they were. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. And neither are you. Harlow pulled back to look at me. What does that mean? It means that if you want to be part of my life, you need to accept my choices, all of them. You need to respect my marriage, my husband, and my right to be happy. And if I can't, then we'll love each other from a distance. I won't let anyone, not even you, make me feel ashamed of the life I'm building. Harlow was quiet for a long time, considering my words. Finally, she turned to Terry. I owe you an apology too, she said. I said terrible things about you, about your relationship with Mom. I was wrong. Terry inclined his head graciously. Grief makes us all say things we don't mean. Do you really love her? With everything I have, Terry said without hesitation. I've loved her for 48 years. Finding her again is the greatest gift I've ever received. Harlow looked between us, taking in the way Terry's eyes softened when he looked at me, the way my hand automatically sought his whenever I was nervous or excited. Slowly, something in her expression shifted. I can see it, she said wonderingly. The way you look at each other. It's like you're the only two people in the world. Sometimes it feels that way, I admitted. Harlow was quiet again, then asked, Are you happy, Mom? Really? Truly happy? I thought about the question, about the life I'd built in this house with this man. The quiet mornings we spent reading together in the conservatory. The way Terry still brought me wildflowers from the garden, because he remembered they were my favorite. The contentment I felt falling asleep beside him each night, knowing that whatever time we had left, we were spending it together. Yes, I said. I'm happy. Harlow nodded slowly, then stood up. Then I guess I need to learn to be happy for you. Does that mean? It means I want to try. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. I want to get to know Terry as your husband instead of your employer. And I want to make up for the months I wasted being angry and jealous and cruel. I stood and hugged her. Really hugged her, for the first time since Dante's funeral. I'd like that very much. As Harlow pulled back, she glanced around the elegant living room, then back at me. This is really your home now. It is. And you're really Mrs. Hawthorne? I am. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in over a year. It's going to take some getting used to, but, Mom, yes. You deserve this. You deserve to be loved and cherished and spoiled a little bit. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. After Harlow left, promising to call soon and asking if she could bring her children to meet their new step-grandfather, Terry and I sat together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Do you think she means it? I asked, about wanting to rebuild our relationship. I think she's her mother's daughter, Terry said, which means she's stronger and more forgiving than she gives herself credit for. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the last of the tension leave my shoulders. For the first time in years, all the pieces of my life seemed to be falling into place. Terry, thank you for fighting for us, for not giving up when things got complicated. He brought my hand to his lips and kissed it softly. Thank you for taking a chance on an old love with an older man. For seeing past the wheelchair and the walls I'd built around my heart. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people in their 70s, starting over like teenagers. The best kind of pair, Terry said. The kind that knows how precious love really is and doesn't waste time taking it for granted. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of losing Dante. The humiliation of being cast out by my own daughter. The fear of starting over with nothing but my memories and my pride. But sometimes, I realized, you have to lose everything to find what you were really looking for all along. And sometimes the love you thought was lost forever has just been waiting patiently for you to come home. After everything I went through, I often wonder, what would you have done in my shoes? If your own child turned their back on you, or if a lost love suddenly reappeared after decades, how would you navigate that? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.